Hey everybody, what is up? Jacob here again with Next Generation Acoustics.com. And in this video, we are going to talk about the top 10 ways that you can instantly improve the acoustics in your room. And the coolest thing about this video is most of these are going to cost you absolutely nothing. But before we get into it, y'all make sure to subscribe. Even making small changes like moving the speakers, rearranging your furniture, or slightly messing with your arrangement a little bit can make vast improvements in your space before you add acoustic treatment. One thing we always try to do is optimize the room first before we add acoustic treatment so everything is working together. So whether you're designing a retail space, a restaurant, a church, or even a home theater room, here's a few ways that you can improve your acoustics in your space immediately. Tip number one is gonna be choosing the proper room size and dimensions for you and what you're doing in the space. Perfectly square or perfectly cubed rooms are not ideal. They're gonna be super problematic for standing waves and frequency buildup. Ideally, for smoother bass, longer rooms are gonna be better than short, super square small rooms. And if you can, try to check out our room dimensions cheat sheet before you say yes to a lease or decide which room you're gonna set up and build your studio in. It's really good to have a resource like that to look over the dimensions and see if the dimensions are ideal before you go ahead and invest in the room and make that your space. Number two, everyone knows it, but it's highly underrated. And it's gonna be speaker placement and listening position. Ideally, you want to form an equilateral triangle, being that each speaker is about 60 degrees to your left and right from where you're sitting. You also have the rule of thirds, being that you wanna be about 30 to 35% back from your front wall to your listening position or your speaker position. If you can get it to where that it's, not listening in the middle of the room or the very back of the room, because that can create a bunch more of unpredictable anomalies that you can't control for. So one very commonly talked about thing is speaker placement and listener position. And the reason why it is so commonly talked about is because it has such a huge impact for such a small investment. Number three is going to be flooring. You want to make sure that you use the right strategy. Remember that carpet is not always ideal. For a studio control room, all carpet floor can overabsorb the high-end frequencies and then leave the bass overly boomy. Many pro studios tend to use a true hardwood floor. That's gonna be the most predictable and acoustically friendly material. If you can, use like a 3/4 inch oak hardwood. And if that's beyond your budget, even a laminate hardwood. And that allows you to place area rugs in certain positions where you need them and have a very predictable outcome in terms of the acoustics in the room. If you have a thick shag carpet, it could overly absorb. Now, on the other hand, if you have a home theater, having a rug there, it could help tame additional harsh frequencies. Maybe you don't have bass traps and you want to soak some of that up. Typically, I think in a home theater room, you want to let the low frequencies kind of run amok because it's going to give you more boom and enhance the listening experience. Remember that a lot of times in consumer headphones, that they actually have a bass boost because that tends to give people the perception of a higher fidelity or quality. So you kind of could create that in your listening room by not overly absorbing the bass, and you could actually leave those frequencies alone, which would not be ideal in a control room or studio environment, but could be ideal in a home theater room environment. An honorable mention is if you do have noisy neighbors, make sure that you use an area that you can ideally put an underlayment or something dense underneath you. You don't want to be having sounds from underneath. If you're over a parking deck, if you have neighbors, you don't want to be bothering them and have them bothering you with your listening room and whatever you're doing in it, whether you're recording, mixing, mastering, or just listening to music. Next, arrange your room for audio, not for decor. Remember that this is supposed to be a sound space, not a living room or a bedroom. So ideally, the furniture and the setup should be set up for what is going to enhance the listening experience or even the response from the speakers. You want to make sure that how you have the room set up is not going to negatively affect that. So for example, you don't want to pile random things up. You don't want to have furniture in the corners piled up or things built up there, because that can create unpredictable responses in the bass and anomalies that you would rather tame using a controlled variable like an acoustic bass trap. You would also want to make sure that you replace any reflective glass surfaces with something like wood. For example, coffee tables, desk. If you can have a wooden desk or a wooden table, or just remove them completely, that can also help remove unpredictable variables and frequency anomalies occurring in the room. One common thing that you hear people say is add bookshelves into the room. You know, libraries are always known for having great acoustics. However, that could be a very unpredictable outcome. So you can, have bookshelves in the room and it would probably sound better than an empty room. But if you want to know exactly what frequency response or have a predictable outcome, then you don't want to just randomly stack books and bookshelves. However, I would say it's better than nothing. And last but not least, keep the listening seat centered in terms of your left to right balance to avoid a lopsided sound. Small moves can reshape the reflection field and low frequency balance. For example, you might hear more bass over on the left side than the right hand side, or you might hear a little bit more brightness on the right hand side than the left hand side. Rooms do have natural peaks and nulls. Going back to our room dimensions cheat sheet in tip number 1, if you have the proper room dimensions and you set it up properly off the gate, it can prevent a lot of those anomalies from occurring later on and causing issues down the road. Number 5, speaker selection. Now, people love to pine over speakers, and one of my biggest pet peeves is seeing people who spend tons and bukus of money on speakers and have absolutely zero invested into their room's acoustical treatment, which we will get to later in the video. However, before we get there, you want to make sure that you have the proper speakers for your setup and room. There's been times where I've seen people who are musicians and artists that have home theater speakers in their control room to mix their music, and then they wonder why their mixing sound bad. You want to make sure that you do have proper audio speakers, studio monitors if you are trying to mix and master music, and that you do have home theater speakers. And if you have a larger room, that you have fill speakers going back in, that you're not trying to overly crank the mains to try to make up for lack of speaker placement. Another thing that you could think about is speaker size relative to the room that you're in. For example, if you're in a smaller room, you don't want 8 or 10-inch studio monitors, because you don't have enough of a noise threshold in the room to carry the amount that those speakers are producing. So typically for a smaller room, you want a smaller set of monitors. The smaller the room, the smaller the sets. So it might be ideal maybe to get 6-inch monitors or 7-inch monitors if you have like a medium-sized room. Something above 7, like the 8-inch plus, are for larger size rooms, and typically for something really small, you want something 5 inches and below in terms of studio monitor size. So think about matching the speaker size relative to the size of the room is very important. That's why they have all those different sizes available. And just think about what you're putting in the room. Bigger isn't always better. Better is better. And matching what you're doing for the Room is what's gonna give you the best outcome. Number 6 is going to be lowering your noise floor. Now, what do I mean by that? That means decreasing the excess noise coming into the room. Remember that lower background noise means more intelligibility and more perceived detail. So for example, adding weather strips around the doors, making sure that the windows, if you have a lot of sound that's coming in through a cityscape or through natural background noise, you want to try to cut that down and eliminate that as much as possible. So another thing too is if you find that you have a background hum coming through cables, through audio signal, through lights. Sometimes dimmers and lights can cause a buzz to come through cables. So just trying to go around and see if you're getting any signal interference somewhere in your room that's causing you, maybe you have to turn something up louder because you're trying to get it louder than that signal interference. Trying to find a way to eliminate that signal interference will give you a better noise floor, so that way you can actually turn things quieter and still hear it clearer. And on the other hand, if the room has the proper dimensions and has been properly treated, which we'll talk about later in the video, how to properly treat your space, if that's something that you even need to do, then you can actually turn your speakers louder because you'll have a higher noise threshold, meaning that if the room has a lot of excess acoustic energy and is already way too loud, turning your speakers up just a little bit is going to have a muddy sound and be very chaotic. If the room is properly designed and properly treated, you can actually turn the speakers up louder and it's even more clear, meaning you have a higher noise threshold before you lose clarity and have muddiness, etc. So you can actually get more out of your speaker system by increasing that noise floor. So those are just a few things to think about: getting rid of noise coming in the room, escaping the room, any signal interference, and ways that if you can decrease excess peaks and nulls and acoustic energy, you can actually turn your speakers up louder and increase the noise floor of your space. So increasing the noise floor, highly underrated. I'm sorry, lowering the noise floor, not increasing the noise floor. We want to decrease the noise floor. Number 7, aim and direction. So you want to be able to control what you can. So ideally you want to aim your speakers, which we talked about earlier, and not only that, but your microphones, if you're in a live or recording situation, in a way in which that best suits the room that you're in. So a good example is if you're using a cardioid microphone, you want to actually have the microphone facing your good sounding wall, which means your back is to the good sounding wall, and then you're speaking out into the lesser good sounding part of the room, which will actually produce a more clear recording than if you do the opposite, which goes against conventional wisdom, because oftentimes you see people put their face in a closet, or you see these like portable vocal booths that go around people's face when the back of them is just an open, untreated space. The thing is if you have a cardioid microphone, what is the pickup pattern for that? Well, let's say the microphone's here facing me. That microphone's gonna come around and get everything that's behind me. So if I'm facing the wall that sounds good, the microphone is not picking up any of the good sounding while it's getting all the bad stuff behind me. So reverse yourself around, face out into the louder room, which is good because it'll give you a little bit of natural reverberation. And the microphone won't even really pick that up anyways, because remember the cardioid pickup pattern, and then have your back towards your best sounding wall, whatever you perceive that to be in your room. And typically that'll give you best results. And you can even apply that same concept to speaker placement or for whatever it may be. So control what you can, aim and direct, and try to get the best out of your space, even if it's not completely 100% optimized, meaning that every area of the room sounds perfect and you can record anywhere in it. There's oftentimes, those sweet spots, and think about utilizing those in a way that is beneficial towards you. And it may be something unconventional that you haven't thought of doing before. Number 8 is gonna be subwoofer strategy, meaning that you wanna try to get your sub placement ideal for your room. especially if you're in a room where the dimensions are already non-ideal for low frequencies. Having a subwoofer at all might not even be needed. We actually have a video where we covered, do I even need a subwoofer for my room, where I share my thoughts on that. But if you do decide to use a subwoofer anyway, and you're wondering about the best placement, you can try something called the sub-crawl method, which is where you play a bass sweep and you can listen to it throughout the room and place the speaker in different positions until you feel like you're getting the best bass response based off your perceptions, and that can be the location that you keep it in. The next is gonna also be using two subs. If you have your one subwoofer back or symmetrically on one specific part of the room, you're gonna try to match that on the other side of the room in the exact same position towards the listening position. Using the acoustical symmetry method, and that the subs aren't overly working, pressing too much gain. You could actually probably keep some of the lows in the mains and then take the subs and turn them down a little bit. And that's gonna give you a better blend or proper mix instead of, you know, scooping out the bass in one and trying to boost them all in the subs just because you bought subs. So don't think about trying to push the subs to their max. Think about blending them with the other speakers so that you're not overly loading just once, and then that specific placement isn't gonna matter as dramatically because you will still have low end coming from the rest of the speakers in the room. Number 9 is gonna be to calibrate and tune your room. Now, we're all familiar with room correction softwares, and I do have another video where I cover the difference between room correction software versus acoustic treatment and my specific views on those. However, you can still utilize a touch of room correction software if needed in your room to help dial it in a bit. Another thing that you can do is make sure that you have the proper gain staging, especially if you're in a live music scenario and you're not overly driving the speakers or the PA system, which is gonna cause distortion. And remember that if you have that better noise floor, you can actually turn the PA system up louder without it getting muddy. If the room is, if you've already followed step 1 through 9, you can get away with that. However, if you haven't, a lot of times it's better to keep everything at a lower level in the entire room to keep things a little bit more clear. If you have the noise floor, you have the proper dimensions, you have a properly treated space, you have the proper furniture layout, you've eliminated all of the variables and you've decreased the noise floor and you've made sure that everything is ready and good to go, a lot of times you can actually crank the system and get more out of the PA system in a live music scenario, in a 2-channel listening room scenario, in a recording studio scenario, in a live music practice room scenario. You'll be able to play louder, have the speakers cranked up more, and just get more out of the overall experience if you followed all the steps. And especially that leads me to number 10, which is add acoustical treatment to your space. If you have followed all the other steps and then you add acoustic treatment, that's when you're gonna get a night and day difference. Because then the panels aren't trying to fix a flooding ship, they're gonna add extra support to something that's already smooth sailing. And once that goes in the proper placement and you get the proper treatment and you get the proper room coverage, then you'll go from having a decent or whatever space to a world-class space. So if you want to know what specific acoustic panels, diffusers, bass traps, baffles are right for you and your specific application, there's millions of different scenarios in which they apply, and the answer is different in each one of those. But we do have a free room analysis form where I will personally get back to you and let you know what I think you need. And if you have a lot of questions and you want me to look over your space and you want me to come up with the design and help you from A to Z, you can book a personal consultation with yours truly, and I will go over everything with you and make sure that we have all your questions answered and everything covered in regards to how to best go about doing everything we need to for your specific environment before we even just slap acoustic treatment into it. Now, that being said, what's the most important thing regarding acoustical treatment is having the right treatment for your specific application. Remember, you don't just want to throw bass traps in an office. A lot of times you just want to decrease excessive reverberation and increase speech intelligibility. You may only need some thinner panels and a less coverage percentage. All the way to where if you're doing a full recording studio, you may need a wide array of products to attenuate different frequencies in the room, and you need a higher coverage percentage. So it can go from being a light touch of treatment needed all the way to we really need to address every square foot of the room and make sure that the spaces in the room have an equal frequency response for you to get the best result out of what you're doing in the space. So I hope that helps. Hope that added some value. If it did, y'all make sure to share this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see y'all again very soon with more acoustics, tips, content, history, etc. Thanks for watching. Peace.